Welcome, demigods. I'm Dan, and if you haven't heard, Percy Jackson is being made into a live-action series at Disney+. That's exciting enough, but during our latest Percy Jackson podcast, we got a bit ahead of ourselves and joked about a potential spin-off series. Ever since, I haven't been able to get the idea out of my head. Imagine a world where the show is so successful that Disney gives Percy Jackson the Marvel or Star Wars treatment. That is to say, they announce an insane number of shows set in that universe. What would those shows be? Well, that's what this video is all about. 7 potential Percy spin-offs. Will these shows happen? Not likely, but it's still fun to think about. A quick disclaimer before we start, I'm only pitching spin-offs for the first 5 novels. Heroes of Olympus could provide enough spin-offs for a whole other video, so if you'd like to see that, let me know. That being said, let's get into it. My first idea is for a show called The Hunters of Artemis. This, is somewhat self-explanatory, but I also think could go in a bunch of different ways. You could have it be like Thalia and the Hunters of Artemis, and have it be her adventures basically going concurrently with Percy Jackson. It could even be set 5 years, 10 years down the line with Thalia's adventures, because obviously she's immortal. That being said, there's also a lot of other options, such as a Zoe prequel, or you could just have flashbacks to the 1920s, or even further back with Zoe, and connect that thematically with what's going on with Thalia. If you did do prequels or flashbacks, you could have a lot of cool stuff seeing the growing romance between Josephine and Emmy, who are characters that come up in the Apollo franchise. But they're from the Hunters of Artemis, and their, falling in love happens during the 1920s, so that could be a cool part of a Zoe prequel. I think both Zoe and Thalia are characters ripe for a spin-off, and it's also an all-female cast, which I think could be really interesting and different. And they just go on their adventures fighting different monsters, hunting things, and, protecting people. And I think that could be really cool and help flesh out some of the other hunters. In general, I think the Hunters are one of the coolest aspects of Greek mythology and of the Percy Jackson universe, so I think that they deserve their own spin-off. My next spin-off idea I'm calling Lord of the Wild. This would be a Grover-centric spin-off. This would take place probably after The Last Olympian, once he is a Lord of the Wild. But basically, it would be like their green show. It would be a cool show for kids to learn about the environment, and would have him, going on adventures to protect the environment and to spread Pan's message and meeting different nymphs and different creatures. And there's all sorts of different bad guys who want to destroy the environment you could introduce. You could even tie in Rachel Elizabeth Dare's father and have him more directly be a villain for this show. I just think there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do here where you put forth positive messages about protecting the environment and conservation and stuff like that. If you've read some of the Apollo books later on, I think that it shows some good stuff for Grover and him being a leader, and I think it's definitely worthwhile going into that more. Next up, I have a spin-off titled simply Castellan, which I believe is how you pronounce Luke's last name. This would be a prequel series. It would show Luke's time with Thalia and Annabeth and their journey together, probably a limited series ending with them getting to Camp Half-Blood and Thalia turning into a tree. This is not necessarily a spin-off that I would want to see, because most of this story I'd want to see in the main Percy Jackson show. But I do think there's stuff to flesh out here, and I think this is stuff that people would want to see, that a lot of fans would want more Luke, a lot more Thalia. And there's stuff like their short stories that flesh this out a little bit more that you could bring into the prequel. There's, the time where they meet the Hunters of Artemis. There's, meeting Annabeth for the first time. Luke having potentially feelings for Thalia, back and forth like that. So, let me know in the comments below whether you think it's worth diving into more or not. Spin-off number 4 is actually based on a book. It's called Percy Jackson's Greek Gods. This is sort of a supplementary work that Riordan did, where Percy narrates actual mythological stories about the Greek gods and sort of puts Riordan's spin on actually teaching you some of the older myths. Now, I didn't read this book, admittedly, but I know that that's the premise of the book, and I think that could be a cool thing for a TV show, sort of in the style of Marvel's What If. So I'm thinking an animated show narrated by the actor who's going to play Percy. Each episode is like an anthology thing, so every episode's about a different myth. And I think that could be really fun, even if it's just for like one season, to dive into each of the characters a little bit more. This next one might be a little out there for people, but I like the idea of a show called Oracle, which follows Rachel Elizabeth Dare right after The Last Olympian as she starts finishing school. Now, not an obvious idea, I think, for a spinoff, but I like the thought of sort of a coming-of-age story of her as this artsy girl with this weird power, trying to fit in this world that she doesn't feel like she belongs in, that she was sort of forced into by her family. There's a lot of backstory, a lot of work done in her family life and everything to create a real solid character out of Rachel. And I think that could be cool, but I also want to add in a murder mystery element. Now, it doesn't have to actually be murder. It could be like students going missing or something like that if that's too intense for Disney. But I like the idea of something's blocking some of her Oracle abilities. She's getting bits and pieces of, oh, this friend that I made disappeared. I see little things. I'm following clues, trying to figure out what's going on. I don't know if it's supernatural or not. And I like the idea of ultimately her having to, like, as a mortal, maybe face off against like one monster at the end, and it being like a one-off season. Also, if I had my way, I'd make Rachel bisexual, have her start falling for one of the girls in her class, and have that romantic struggle of, oh, I'm the Oracle, I'm not supposed to date anyone, I'm not supposed to fall for anyone. I think that could be nice and teen angsty and be cool. For my next show, I want you to start by picturing an angsty teen loner traveling the world alone in angst. And no, I'm not talking about Nico. Nico totally deserves a spinoff, but I think it should be set post Heroes of Olympus, so I'm considering that a Heroes of Olympus spinoff. Anyway, I'm actually talking about Ethan Nakamura in a show that I would want to call The Path of Nemesis. I think this could be interesting to show his backstory, maybe show a little bit more of what he has going on with the Titan Army and all that stuff. But ultimately, what I'd want to do is pull a Boba Fett, and he didn't actually die. And so, somehow he got saved after fighting Kronos, and he goes off on his adventures alone, sort of serving justice and retribution where he thinks people need it. We see him traveling the country, fighting monsters, not feeling like he fits in, and sort of looking for his place in the world. Ethan's an awesome character that I think deserved a lot more. My last idea is admittedly a bit of a joke. It would be for an animated series entitled Monster Donut. Now, if you don't remember, Monster Donut is this chain that monsters go and they eat donuts. And I think it could make for a fantastic workplace comedy where all the characters are monsters, basically, and they have to deal with these annoying demigods. And it's just a wacky little comedy cartoon. And yeah, I know like that would never happen in a million years and it's kind of dumb, but I would totally watch that show. But that's my idea. Those are my 7 ideas. Let me know if you guys have any ideas in the comments down below, what you think of the ones I have, and what you would love to see in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching, and may the gods be ever in your favor.